All right, so we're sitting down with Swaney Group Capital Chief Operating Officer Robert Bo Plant III. Can you do me a favor? Give me the 30 seconds on your background. Love to hear a little bit about your military, and then some startup stuff, and then you're coming over to our firm.
Yeah. So my professional life, I guess so to speak, started at Virginia Tech. I graduated from there back in around 2013 or so. At which point I worked for the State Department for a few months in Moscow. I served as a translator over there in the embassy over there, took some classes. Came back from that, wanted to continue my service. I joined the Marine Corps where I was an officer for a number of years, 9, 10 years, something like that. Everything's starting to blend together a little bit, especially since I joined the firm. And around that, it was a great experience in the Marine Corps. I, learned how to be a leader, cut my teeth professionally. Decided I wanted something more. Pursued a chance to join the Army Special Forces. While still a Marine, was selected, switched branches over to the Army. Still a controversial decision to this day. Getting ribbed for that even from the old Marine colleagues. And finished out my career in the Army. Met a lot of great leaders. Learned a lot of great lessons there. Decided to move on for family and personal reasons. And, that's at one point I linked up with you, was one of the first guys on the team, and I've been with Swaney Group ever since, trying to help build this firm. So it's been a great ride.
Super. Great to sit down with you. Let's dive right in. One of the frequent topics we get is leadership and strategic planning. So I'd love to hear a couple of your experiences talking about leading strategic planning initiatives, some in both the military, and then how that changes over to corporate kind of civilian setting.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I appreciate you having me on here. We've been trotting through such a esteemed guest list through the podcast that I'm not sure I'm meeting the bar, but I do appreciate the nod. So I'm excited to be here. I think that is one of the more fungible skills between the military and my experience within the private equity and advisory realm, is the strategic process planning, because really in the end it's process development, it's leadership, and it's human influence, right? It's human relations. And I think within those three categories, those are all skills that you can easily develop as a leader in the military, and then can translate over into the private sector or private business, right? And it's if you're given the right tools and you're out of the box thinker and you can apply process and you can deal with people, it's something that's successful. And you and I have worked through that problem. I've gotten a lot of mentorship from yourself, obviously, and you kind of threw me to the wolves and let me run the process and deal with that and figure it out on my own at a couple different companies now. So I think that has been one of the most transferable assets from the military to private equity or advisory services, is being able to develop process and strategically plan.
What's a big difference? So we stuck you in where you were setting up transformation management office. Kind of partially the emergent model, partially things you take it from the military and your skills. What is the biggest difference you found in running that process with military teams and running that process with civilian teams?
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of working with some of the most high-powered military teams, and I think one of the things I learned there is that you're never, as much as you prepare for a scenario, whether it's the weeks lead up to the project or the weeks lead up to the mission, on behalf of the US government, you're never actually going to know what's going to happen when you hit the ground. You can plan for it all you want, but you need to remain flexible. And I think that TMO in particular, that you threw me at very early on in my career, was one of those where I was given the tool set. I had we talked through what the plan may be, what it may look like, and then I had to kind of just get on the ground and begin having those conversations with the key stakeholders, the chief supply chain officer, the executive team, some of the middle management and key personnel that would be influencing the various decisions that we'd be making down the road, and start to get an idea of what the actual situation on the ground was at that company and what they were driving towards and how the tools that I was given could apply to that scenario. You can prepare that as much as you want, and the more experience you can draw on is great. But in reality, you got to get there. You got to talk to the people and then take the tools and adapt them to the organization to avoid any kind of organ rejection. And I think that is the first key. And I think it's something that a lot of people overlook nowadays.
So, what's an example of a typical problem, as like a problem day to day operating on the ground? in the civilian world, right? We all know the problems, from movies and television of what can happen in the military.
Yeah.
Something goes horribly wrong. Nothing's usually going to go horribly wrong in a civilian world. So, what's an example of a typical problem or roadblock that you have to unclog?
I think going back to just like I mentioned a minute ago, it's that organ rejection, right? And it's something I saw in the military. A lot of my military experience was working alongside of international partner forces. And just like when you're a consultant or you're a private equity expert coming in, especially if you've got a large background of experience in whatever the industry it is, the same assumption can be applied to a U.S. military special operations member that's going to work with a partner force. Is assume that you are the subject matter expert, just as a consultant is assumed to be a subject matter expert at that organization for the project they're brought into. And I think sometimes that can lend itself to complacency on behalf of the consultant, because you begin to assume that the processes that you built out are the right way of doing things, and you neglect the fact that the process needs to be adapted to the human aspect of that organization. And it was the same thing when I worked with partner forces. We had our tactics, we had the way to do things. It's made America a successful military force, but it doesn't always apply to the culture or the personnel that are involved in that partner force military. So I think that the common mistake that you see is that this is the right way to do things. You should do it the way I'm saying to do it because you brought me on board. When in reality, this is the way that it works. That I've seen it work the best. What are your systems like? What are your people like? And how can we mold this to prevent any type of organ rejection and actually achieve the shared end state that we lay out at the beginning of this project?
So whenever there's a major change program, a transformation project, whatever you want to call it, there's an existing organizational culture, and then it's going to thaw a little bit because the executives, the leadership, the board is trying to drive change. And so what I'm hearing you say is people issues become front and center. Can you give me an example of a person issue that you had to solve?
Yeah, people issues are everything. Because in the end, organizations are just groupings of people organized within systems and processes that those people have developed, right? So if you really boil down any issue that you may run into on the ground, in the end, it can be solved through the right use and right facilitation of the people of that organization. So a great example of that is, and it could be fairly negative, but when we went and we established a TMO, there's a company out in the Midwest. We established the TMO because they had a great strategic plan. They had great initiatives, but those just weren't being executed at some levels as quickly as the executive team would have liked. So we went in there to establish that TMO and help drive those initiatives under differing levels of leadership that would drive accountability. And once we had that set up, for the most part, it was, over a course of 8 weeks, it was humming pretty well. But we had a large pocket of value within their product optimization that was not moving as fast as it could have. And I think that in today's world, a lot of people will tend to shy away from confrontation. I think that my personal philosophy is there is a respectful way to confront an individual in regards to their performance or their milestone accomplishment. And that's what I did with this individual. Hey, listen, this is the plan we agreed upon when we chartered this project. These are the milestones. This is the timeline. We briefed the executive team. You're not meeting those. I'm going to have to put red on the slide to the executive team member. What can I do to help you prevent that? And I tried to have that conversation 2 or 3 times in the lead up to that meeting. That individual was very positive to my face, but continued to not produce the outputs. So eventually, after I had exhausted all those means, had to work with that TMO team leadership on the company side and put red. And unfortunately, that led to a change of project leadership. But in the end, it was something that had to occur. We made positive progress after that. And I think it boils down to getting comfortable with respectful confrontation within an accountability system that you develop.
Okay, so the place we're looking at, or the company we're looking at, was a call it a good to great story, or doing okay to better story.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things that we're looking at are lots of revenue leakage.
Sure.
Lots of revenue leakage, might be, let's say, aggressively undermanaged. How do you think about change in that context versus change in the good to great story and your partnership, and candidly the relationships you're building? How do you think about the difference between those two scenarios? Because we're going to have team members at option A and we're going to have team members at option B. So what advice would you give for either of those, and what's the difference, and how do you pivot?
Yeah, I think that when you're coming into a scenario that we typically look for, especially there's a leakage. There's a lot of potential mismanagement at differing levels. I think that outside of the initial planning that you can do to identify value creation levers, and all of that analysis that the team will kind of come together for, so that you have a plan going into touching feet, boots on the ground, so to speak, day one. It then comes to spending the first, a lot of guys, and I saw this. Let me back up. I saw this in the military a lot. I think some of the leaders that I saw probably had the most room for growth, to put that politically, wanted to hit the ground and immediately enact change day one. And that caused a lot of friction. It caused a lot of pushback. And I think that's human nature. What I've found to be successful, that I've seen from successful leaders, and I've found to be, fungible to this industry as well, is getting on the ground, having a plan in the back of your mind, in your back pocket, but also spending that initial time building rapport with the individuals that currently make up the leadership teams, the middle management teams, and the bottom tier, the ground floor workers, the guys on the plant floor, so to speak. Build that rapport, spend that time, listen to them, hear what they have to say, because it will help build your situational awareness on the ground and give you better feedback as to how you can apply the value creation plan you developed so fastidiously leading up to that, how it will actually adapt, and what personnel bottlenecks you may need to address.
So if you're handed the key, let's go forward a scenario. You're handed the keys to an asset. You weren't on the diligence, and you're dropped in day one, and you've got to, I can never say this word, reconnoit around and figure out your bearings. What's job
term.
one, day one, and then what do the first 30 days look like for something that's a little more challenged?
Some of them are challenged. So I think day one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in. I'm probably going to bring a small team, two or three guys, maybe some of my junior team members. And what I would like to do is obviously immediately sit down with the leadership. Obviously, the conversation with the chief executive is going to be something that I'm going to have personally, right? That's one that shouldn't drop below my level as the team leader. But I would say some of the other members of the executive team, as well as middle management, I'd like to immediately have them sit down in interviews with some of my team members, listen, build that rapport with the team, show not only that they can have confidence in my team member, that we're competent individuals, but also have my guys get a feel for what those people's actual roles are in the organization, not just officially, but also kind of where the soft power lies, so to speak. And give them the understanding that we are trying to understand the organization of how it actually works, right? That we're not going to come in again, make that change day one. And once we have done that, then we can begin looking at, over the next 24 hours from the first day, now I'm going to go down to the plant floor, or I'm going to go down to the line workers and begin talking to them, hearing their opinions. I'm going to take middle management individuals out to dinner. I think those first 48 hours on the ground, where I can have maybe 2 dinners, one with exec team, one with the middle management team, with those interviews and interpersonal conversations occurring during the day, give me the flexibility to begin planning out the next 28 days, and how we're actually going to start implementing this value creation plan. And most importantly, what is the governance and battle rhythm going to be for the follow-on weeks?
So if you got everything you wanted from an information and insights perspective, and then you set up a process and that governance you're talking about that obviously we're all passionate about here, what does that look like? What information do you need to inform, to get the leadership team on board that, frankly, there's going to be changes at the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, it boils down to honest and open communication. Like once I have an idea of who are the personnel bottlenecks, who are the holders of soft power, who are the holders of authoritative power, right? I can identify those stakeholders and be open and honest in communication as to what the plan is. The assumption has to be that, with very glaring exceptions, that the people who are part of that organization want to see the organization succeed, whether it's for personal benefit or dedication organization, which I think a lot of guys in our firm have, or a mix of both, right? So I can only assume that the plan, if I'm open and honest with the plan of how we're going to make this better, there's not going to be too much pushback if they understand at the outset what we're trying to achieve, right? And they feel heard in that discussion. And then after that, it's honestly just grabbing people's time on their calendar as soon as you possibly can. Because the further out I can schedule recurring weekly and bi-weekly meetings, the less chance people have to wiggle out of those meetings or cancel last minute, or say that they have a conflict, because that's just been the culture of the organization, right? Or whatever the case may be. And that's when the accountability engine kicks in and you can really start to enact that plan.
Yeah. So one of the things that we teach here a lot is we got to set the heartbeat
Mm.
up, the governance and the heartbeat for change. And if you can get that heartbeat humming in the organization, you can inject any content into the business. You can't do 20 things at once, but once you
Yeah.
take one off the list, you put another one back. You put another one back on the list. You had a lot of success at the org you were talking about earlier, where setting that heartbeat up. Like, walk me through the approach of setting that meeting up, because you kind of built the plane as you fly it. You had 4 levels of connectivity. Like,
Yeah.
walk me through that process. I know people out that are listening are kind of junior finance professionals, some seasoned operators. I believe that's the most important thing. So I'd love to hear how you put that in place in a good example.
Yeah, I think it's funny because that's like it's one of the simplest things, but for some reason it's also one of the hardest things to do right off the bat. And that this organization in particular was a great lesson for me in the importance of that. And I think they had these initiatives already going, so that was the analogy throughout the project. We're building this plane in flight, which is fine. Again, listening to the key stakeholders, the key leaders within the organization of what they actually wanted this thing to achieve, and help me build out the process of what the project chartering looked like. It took a couple meetings of, hey, we're going to do an up down to Chicago and meet them in the airport for a 3-hour workshop and then fly back. A couple intense sessions like that. But once we got a general idea of what the structure of the TMO would look like and how the accountability process would work, I then switched to a train the trainer approach. I think a critical aspect of these type of things is that unless we were to actively own the asset, I need to assume that we're not going to be there forever. So anything that I am setting up within the organization I need to have a partner alongside me that's watching how we're building it, understanding the inner workings so that I can hand it off eventually. So I think we immediately adapted, side by side roles within that TMO. And I utilized that person that was assigned with me as like the TMO chief to use their unique access to everyone in the organization's calendars to just start placing things on the calendar and achieving that. So you kind of, in a lot of ways, have to use the organization and the assets that it has, its software, its culture, its processes, to your favor in order to enact your tools. And that was the direction I went in order to immediately set that heartbeat and made sure that it just showed up on people's schedule and they started attending because it was there, right? Before, and then they built their understanding of the process after that.
So let's pivot over a little bit, right? So you transitioned out of the military relatively recently, and you're still in the reserves. What were what was it like transitioning out of the military and coming into the civilian world? I know you did some consulting first before you came and joined our team, and then walk me through your experience there and how that helped you.
Yeah, I think that my first love was, my first professional love was the military, right? I started out as a Marine, ended up switching over to the Army, which was to this day a very controversial decision depending on who you talk to. But eventually, for family reasons and personal reasons, decided it was time to move on. And I had got my MBA at night, and I think I wasn't really sure. I wasn't really sure what my professional career would look like after the military. But I knew whatever it was, I wanted to be on a high-powered, engaging team that was solving. There was no repetitive days, so to speak. So I think that Swaney Group was very much in its idea infancy when you and I connected,
For sure.
and we had our conversation, put me through the ringer in regards to the case study. Which, if you're listening to this and you're looking to apply, there is some prep required. I was probably I've sweated a lot of times in my military career and done some pretty difficult stuff. That that one had me shaking too. So. But yeah, I just knew I wanted to solve dynamic problems, and I wanted to be around people that I enjoyed solving those problems with, and I needed to have purpose and some level of excitement. And I think that's something I found here, and I think that's a sentiment of a lot of military individuals, especially those that come from the high performing aspects of the military.
Yep.
And it's less about the industry and more about the team you're going to join, I think. And luckily I found a pretty good home in that here.
So you've basically been dropped in now. You've been with me for a good bit. You've got kind of a local team of 8 professionals to manage, a pipeline through SkillBridge. We've got a semi-global team with support staff in India, with some in Singapore, and we've got some in Colombia.
Yep.
What's it like managing right? Your teams, I believe, tend to be pretty local when you're in the military. So, what
Yep.
it's like now having a global team? How are you thinking about training them and developing the leaders so they can go run their own assets without you being there every day?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think that you have to obviously identify the roles that each of those people are going to fill, right? That's first and foremost, and we've done a good job of that. But that it needs to go further in that you need to identify what the end state of a fully trained person within that role is. I think it's one of the things we did early on for the director and the associate director positions. We're doing in stride for our investment and operations analyst position, which is one of our overseas roles. Um, Once you set that end state, any planning I do, and this is a skill I picked up from the military, is backwards planning. I want to set what is the objective, what's the end state, what do I want the battlefield, to put in military terms, to look like at the end of the day, so that if I'm not even here, someone understands what the end state was and can accomplish that. So
Yep.
what's the end state, and then I can back plan off of that. Do the same thing with the roles. And then from there, you can build what the training pipeline looks like for that individuals. The easiest case to break out is our director roles. Many of those are former military and former special operations guys. And we, typically when you hear special operations or the type of guys that we bring on board at the director level, people just think like, oh, they're high performing problem solvers. And in this world, I think I would actually, and I mean this in a positive way, they're high performing amateurs is really what they are. They may have an MBA, they may have some minor business experience like myself, where I'd done a startup, I had done some nonprofit consulting. In the world of private equity and heavy cash flow industries, I was still new. So these guys are high performing amateurs. They have all the potential in the world. They need to be exposed to situations where they have the ability to be given a tool set, be given a playbook like procurement or TMO or gross margin improvement, and be sent to the client site with oversight from me, someone who has experience in that project, and be allowed to make the mistakes within a fairly controlled environment, understand their left and rights, and be able to execute. So that's really what we look for guys, and that helps achieve the end state in their training plan of like, at some point you got to, as we say in the military, you got to get out in the range, you got to fire your weapon. I can give them all the tools in the world, but it's part of that training plan for all of our aspects involves on the job training.
So, how would you describe a high performing team? Right? What does that mean to you? As pithy way?
High performing team is one that understands what its objective is, understands what its end state is, and that any one member can be removed at any time. And there's still enough overlapping responsibilities that team can continue to move forward. I would say that I have failed in my role as the chief operating officer. I've failed the firm and yourself if my absence causes any type of friction in the forward movement of the team, right? So to avoid that, you set up systems and processes. That's what really makes high performing team is good systems and processes manned by outside the box thinkers that can solve problems dynamically.
So, give me an example of a process you're putting in place, or it's in place already, or what do you see future processes looking like? Because you've got people that are high capability, lots of experience in leadership. Ran large teams or ran small teams. Like Trey's ran many teams, lots
Sure.
of teams over 14 years. He was a SEAL. So, what are the processes that work with those, work for those team members?
So I think at a macro level on our team, understanding macro means me and 8 guys. Um, it comes down to task organizing based off the projects and the deals we have coming through, as well as assigning ancillary duties for firm building. Right. So one of the major things that once we had an influx of these high performing individuals is we needed to build out firm processes and all that. So we immediately set these ancillary builds of like, hey, the senior advisor network is manned by Ray, right?
Yep.
The deal flow and cutting edge software for our intent based search is manned by Ben. He's developing that, right? Um, we have the talent pipeline. Trey's all over that. I give them the secondary billet, and I give them the end state that you and I would like of that firm building initiative. They then come back to us with the plan, and then I get an update on that plan at the daily 9 a.m. check-in with the team, and then you get the Friday weekly wrap-up and secondary billet process check-in. It's exactly how we would run it at a company. You kind of got to take your own medicine at some point and set up your own heartbeat. And I think that that is how you set conditions to become a high performing team or move in that direction.
So I've heard people say before, some of the leadership gurus say, very highly capable people don't like being managed.
Mm.
So how do you balance putting processes in place with and structure with giving people freedom to work?
Yeah, I think it's less about being directive and more about setting, again, I keep saying the word, but setting an end state and then setting left and right lateral limits. I'm gonna use an example. I worked with when I was with the Army Special Forces, I worked with a fantastic team sergeant who had hit a point where he could basically read my mind. We had a great working relationship. But what really impressed me about him, and what really made him a fantastic leader of that team at the senior NCO level, was that I could say, "Hey, this needs to occur, and I think it ought to look like this at the end of the day." If he had feedback, him and I would adjust what we felt the end state was till we agreed, and then if there was any like, okay, and we also, this is the timeline, right? X, Y, Z. This is your left, right lateral limit. We got to stay in this lane. That's all I needed to give him. And I knew within 48 hours, or if not the same day, he was coming back with the plan or having already tasked the team in a way that I didn't even need to check. After over time, I did my trust but verify, but it hit a
Yep.
point where I just trusted him, and it just was consistent positive results. And that is the same approach that I try to take with this team here, right? I don't want to tell a Trey or a Nick what to do exactly and how to accomplish the plan. I want to give them what the end state is, what restrictions are on them, and then let them solve that problem and answer their questions as they arise.
What do you do if somebody comes to you with a plan and 90% of it's good? One thing you kind of you passionately disagree with it. What do you do in that situation to get feedback and to make sure you're heard? Because at the end of the day, if you're giving them the end state, or you give them the end state and you're giving them the method, what do you do to manage that situation? It's had to have happened.
Yeah, it's certainly happened, and there's a million examples, but I think usually when I see that, the first they're expecting feedback. They know that positive or negative, I'm going to give them feedback every time they send something to me, because simply ignoring products that your people have put together to spend time on is a classic leadership shortfall. Even if you have nothing to say, there is a positive level of feedback to be given. So they know to expect feedback. I think the first question, if I in that scenario that I'm asking, is walk me through your thought process on that topic, right? When I was an instructor in Quantico with the Marine Corps prior to my switch to the Army, they very much preached at the instructor education program Socratic questioning, right? It's, you may know what the answer is, but question them to walk them onto the answer so that they walk themselves onto the answer. It can be very Inception like. And I think it's a great way to do it. Walk me through your thinking, right? And based off of that, I can continue to ask questions that either lead them to better understand or put them in the direction they want, where it comes out of their mouth and they better retain that knowledge. Or maybe I've overlooked something, and maybe there's an aspect in their analysis of the situation that I missed, and they have a good reasoning for that. And I need to give that the opportunity to come to light as well. So I think that's how I'd start the conversation. And then it's just a matter of asking. And, there is a point for directive feedback, especially in high octane situations, but that trust of like, I just need to go with what Bo says or what Paul says needs to be built prior. You cannot build that trust with that team member in the moment, right? They need to understand, okay, he's the leader. Like, I just got to do what he says. And I've got enough faith in him that, and in his experience, that's what's best, right?
So let's do, since a lot of people listening are in finance industry, let's walk through Ben's collateral duty or ancillary duty for the tech stack and kind of outbound outreach for investment sourcing. Can you walk through that process of getting him aligned on the goal and how that works with feedback and growth and development?
Yeah, so that's been an interesting one, right? Because as with where the firm currently stands, it's critical for us to iron out the friction points in our deal sourcing and analysis processes. And I think that's probably one of the most critical firm initiatives that we have. And Ben's been doing a great job. But one thing we identified early is that we were able to access a large amount of data regarding, we'll say Florida regional manufacturing companies, right?
Yep.
It's a large industry tag. Gave us a couple thousand thoughts, and we developed a cold call procedure. We developed a vetting procedure. We had our themes that we had built a lot of data on and a deep dove on each one. So we knew what type of companies we look for, but it was a time suck to not only whittle down this massive list, but also cold call all of these companies. It just wasn't efficient. So the intent that, after discussion with you that we gave to Ben and he took off and ran with was we have to find a way to make this sourcing, these calling targets more efficient. They can't have to go from cold to lukewarm leads at least, right? Because we simply don't have the time with our advisory and the size of our firm. And I think that was a vestige from the military. Like when I was overseas, we weren't going after targets we didn't go after cold targets. That's an international incident waiting to happen. They at a minimum had to be microwave ready. So, that made a lot of sense to me. And through his research and networking throughout the firm, and with our external, senior advisors, we came across the, intent-based search. Since then, because all of this is very software related, we found a program that would fit in that allowed us to work with, Google searches and figure out who's looking at private equity that fit within our already, developing tech stack. And he found one. He found an economical option price-wise that fit exactly what we needed. We tested it out. It whittled 2,000 down to 150, which led to, almost a 25% jump in positive reception to our calls based off that list.
Yep.
And that is, to me, a great example of all I asked him was turn these cold leads into lukewarm leads. And he went after a piece of software, developed a thesis on it, validated that thesis, developed a plan forward, both financially and technology integration wise. And now it's part of our tech stack. So I think that, we'll continue to use that software. We're going to continue to track the data, make sure that it's as efficient as we're currently hypothesizing it is based off initial reports. But I think it's a great example of like what, decent leadership, setting a good intent for your guys and then letting a high performer individual figure it out. That's one of my favorite examples. And we're using it every day now.
So what's the goal? We've got eight core team members right now that sit in the office. What's the goal for each of those team members that you have over the next 12 months?
Over the next 12 months, I want them to be able in many ways within an industry that we understand, particularly manufacturing or industrials, be able to be dropped at an asset that hopefully, we own by that point, and be able to run a business unit at a minimum at that asset, right? That means over the next 12 months, I need to get them on the ground. They need to run some type of project. They need to get exposed to some type of business processes within those specific industries, within our 8 themes, so that I can not fire and forget them, but I don't need to check on them on a daily basis once they are, in military speak, so to speak, downrange, right?
Yep.
So that means in 12 months, I need them to not only understand how the firm works, how our deal process works, what we're looking for when we're conducting a deal, but I also need them to go and at the current time, my training area, so to speak, on the advisory side, I need them to go on site with a client. I need them to run a PMO, a TMO, again, a gross margin improvement, a recontracting war room, whatever the case would be. I need them to get out there and do at least 1 to preferably 2 of those so that I can trust that they're fully trained to run the value creation plan we identify for an asset we purchase within 12 months.
So I've hired military professionals for over a decade now. So I've drank the Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten some feedback on X that say, hey, it seems very aggressive to make someone, standalone capable within, 24 months, whatever it is, 18, 24 months. What feedback would you give the people that have that mindset, and why, I want you to steel man why it's a good thing to hire military people?
Well, I'm going to lean towards the special operations guys here because it's a bit more quantifiable. You can find this in any military member, right? I'm not, I don't want to exclude any military occupational specialty here, but I'm going to focus on the special operations guys. The Army Special Forces qualification course in particular, and Bud and the SEALs kind of mirror this, is only 1.5 years to, if you're a medic, 2 years long at most, right? Some guys, if they already speak a foreign language for the Green Berets, can get the whole course done in 1 year because that last 6 months is usually language school. So that means that the actual hard skills training in order to be a Green Beret in the Army Special Forces is really only 1 year long, year plus or minus a month. And then those guys are expected to join a team that has varying levels of experience, and upon joining that team day one, should be deployable overseas to represent the United States, and whether that be kinetic combat operations or partner force, training a partner force that is an ally of the US or a country we're looking to expand influence into. So if you're telling me that someone can be entrusted with multi-millions of dollars of equipment, mission, and the entire strategic initiatives of a country overseas after 1 year of training, I don't see any reason why a person of that caliber can't be dropped at a business, business within the continental US with a toolkit and not be able to, not be able to make decisions and begin to create impacts on the ground, right? I think that that's kind of it's a very myopic view if you think that pure experience is what drives success in any initiative.
Yeah, so there are some people that would say, clearly not us, that it takes a while to get the hangover from the military off. What would you say to that when someone offers that objection? I don't see it as much and more in civilian employment, but it does exist in some pockets.
Yeah, I think that the military hangover occurs because you'll see it just like you would in individuals that stick in a specific industry or in a very specific job, like packaging manager for 20 years, right? It's going to be hard for them to break the vernacular of that role.
Yep.
And I think that the military hangover occurs because guys stay in the military for 10, 15, 20 years, and they come out and they work in private industry using the same vernacular they use in the military. It's slipped through a couple times for me in this podcast, but the truly high performing individuals, the ones that we look for, understand that it's just like speaking a language. Like it's the difference between English and Spanish, right? If I speak both languages, I'm liable to also be able to identify when is best to use one over the other. At this point in my career, and what these guys are driving towards too, and what we generally understand, and what your high performing military members will understand, is that they can use that military language and analogies to their benefit, but also understand when it's not being received well and they need to switch gears to a more accommodating way of speaking. And I think that alleviates the military hangover very quickly.
That's good. That's good. The it's very binary, the outcomes I've seen. I've seen like very much success. Somebody comes in and absolutely nails it. And then I've seen it kind of fizzles, right? It's some can make the leap, some can't, particularly as if you've done 30 years, and it's 30 years. If you've done 30 years in the military, it's a bit harder to make the jump. But
well, this may get me canceled or whatever the case would be, but let's call a spade. Not every person who joins the military is a high performing, high octane performer, right? Or individual. And those individuals are supporting what makes the U.S. military so great is that those individuals, their negative impact, if they have one, is mitigated because there's such ingrained, there's doctrine, there's processes built over hundreds of years of lessons and all. There's so many safety nets within the U.S. military and processes and things to follow that you don't need to be the best performer on earth in order to be good at your job. And the closer you get to organizations in the military where there's less processes and there's less safety nets, the more they beat the crap out of you to get there, right? Because they need to make sure that you're someone who can function in that. So, I think that's probably the reasoning behind that one.
Oh, that's good. The naval forces has a procedure for everything.
Yeah.
Okay. What advice would you give, let's say, to young professionals looking to advance their careers? Think somebody that's just coming out of college, or middle of their first 4 years in career.
First thing you gotta do is listen. I think that, and that applies to not even just to individuals looking to advance their career, but also, just kind of across the board. I think as senior executives get up there, they stop listening and then they become less effective leaders, right? The reason I say listen is because the more talking you do, or the more preconceived notions you come in from day one, if this is your new career, the less you're going to retain, the less you're actually going to adapt to the new environment that you're in, or better understand the environment you continue to be in. So listen, because it's going to inform your questions. And then once you have good questions, you begin to approach, the associate, the VP, the principal, maybe even the MD at a social event, right? If you come armed with those good questions, it'll make you stand out. And I would say that also applies to expanding your network outside of your current role, right? I mean, when I decided to get out of the military, I only found myself in my current position because I just started getting on LinkedIn. I identified what I thought might be fields I was interested in, and I
Yep.
just started to find people that worked in those and said, "Hey, listen, I am a Army. I'm in the Army. I have my MBA. I want to transition out. I'm interested in your experience." And I legitimately meant I just wanted to listen to their experience. And if at the end of it they offered help, then I could, make an ask of like, hey, could you introduce someone else? Do you know any roles available? But I never went into it knowing I was going to ask for a favor. I went into it going to listen and learn first off. And that genuineness helps you expand your network so much faster and leads to opportunities.
What was your hit rate for those emails? Out of every 10 you sent, how many responses did you get?
I would say, I think because of what I was able, and this may be a benefit of, again, that the butt kicking that the military gave me multiple times, what I was able to put as my experience in the military and where I was coming from, it was probably 4 to 6. I'd say
Good.
probably around a 50% hit rate.
That's really
Usually, now that didn't always lead to conversations, but I would at least get a response back declining, which was respectful, right?
Yep. That's good. There's a lot of junior professionals that I believe that they are very focused on the hard skills, the Excel, the PowerPoint skills. And the advice I tend to give is you got to get out there and network more, meet people. But there seems to be a roadblock between some of those team members or those colleagues that they don't want to do that. What advice would you give to them to help remove that roadblock, and why it's more important, or at least just as important as the hard skills?
I I think that it comes down to, when you look at high performing teams in the military, they don't expect the guys that show up for the tryouts to already know all the skills necessary to be a functioning member of the teams that are the output of the training, right? They look for potential. They look to, you go to Army Special Forces Assessment Selection, they teach you land navigation in selection, and then you are tested on it by the end of the week. They look for the guys that are able to pick that up quickly, be introduced to a new topic, and then perform at an acceptable, not a proficient, but an acceptable level,
Okay.
because it demonstrates potential. Got it. There are hard skills, and there's two sides of that coin. If you're looking for a job that requires hard skills, you should spend time learning those hard skills as much as you can prior to that interview, right? At the same time, if I was looking for a specific role that had some hard skill requirement, I would lean more towards focusing on what is the potential of the individual sitting across from me to learn those skills while also providing something more dynamic to my organization than whether or not they had those hard skills coming in, depending on the role. I think the potential should always be first, hard skills second, because someone with potential can learn quick.
So, given that, how do you set personal and professional goals for yourself? What's the biggest thing you're working on right now, personally and professionally?
I think personally, my professional goal is to develop a team, that sits in this office every day that can operate 100% without me. That is my personal professional goal at the moment, in the short term, the 12 to 15, 12 to 18-month term,
Yep.
as well as, continue the firm building initiatives that you and I are pursuing. I think overall, it really, when I'm setting my life goals, my personal goals and my professional goals, it just boils down to what I want in life. For me, my family life was one of the reasons I decided to, put myself in recklessly dangerous scenarios on behalf of the US government. Was probably not the best decision anymore. And that feeds over into, at this point, I want to build the firm and, not only set the team up for success, but set myself up for enough financial and professional success that by the time, my son is older and he's in sports, I have the financial freedom to be able to attend those events.
Yep.
And I think that anytime you're setting goals, personally or professionally, you need to just figure out what's driving you first.
Is he playing hockey or lacrosse? Or yeah.
Well, he's half finished. So I actually left today. He already had the hockey stick waving around. So
Can he skate already?
He'll be skating with him. Otherwise his mom will disown him.
What's the best thing you ever did to advance your career, and get you to where you're at now?
I think it was just both in the military and here. It was putting my fear of failure aside and taking the leap. When I wanted to join the Marine Corps or the Army, I wanted to join a high performing team, but the selection rate is exceptionally low. And when you're going into that, you're not sure you're going to make it. And a lot of guys will self-select themselves off that alone. They will just choose to stay where it's comfortable because they're afraid of the failure, they're afraid of the embarrassment that comes with that. And it was the same thing here. When I decided to get out of the military, the military, as wild as it is to say, was my comfort zone. I was very comfortable in the military, despite how uncomfortable the job can be, because it's what I knew. And leaving that for something uncertain like private equity was, did make me nervous. And I was nervous that I wouldn't pick up any traction. I would land in a job I didn't like, or even worse, I wouldn't be good at it and I would fail. And now I don't have this comfort zone of what I know anymore. So I think the best thing I ever did was get comfortable being uncomfortable, and getting over that fear of failure and embarrassment, and getting myself comfortable taking that leap.
So, you're signing up for the Q course. You're pivoting services to go over to the Army to do a very hard job to qualify with a 15-20% pass rate. Is that right?
Yeah, if you're lucky.
If you're lucky, it's had for 5-10%. So you're changing your whole branch of the service. So you kind of burnt your bridge a little bit. The Cortez, use the Cortez metaphor.
Yep.
Was there ever a moment where you thought you weren't going to make it?
Yeah, many times. I mean, you can't say too much about selection. If you're listening and you're interested, you're more than welcome to find out and be happy to help you get there. But yeah, there was plenty of times. I mean, every day you don't know if you didn't fill your canteen up to the very top, if one of the instructors would check it, and then you would be dropped for disobeying a direct instruction, right, or not following a direct instruction. So I would say every day I wasn't sure I was going to make it. Somehow I did. I guess they took a risk on me. But yeah, I mean, certainly that exists every day, and to some extent it exists here. As your chief operating officer, you give me a title that requires some performance, right? I still have the days where, I don't always have the answer, and I still need to be able to perform to the level the firm expects and the team expects. And I don't always know if I have that capacity, but I know I got to try, right? And I will never stop trying. And I think that's what's key.
What was the moment that you've been here, and I'm springing this on you, that you said, okay, I think we've got something here that's going to work? Walk me through that, because we've had a couple, okay, there's something special here. Like, walk me through one of those examples.
I think to be honest with you, it was the very first project you put me on. Obviously, most of the team was committed elsewhere. You were committed elsewhere. We just did not have the bandwidth for anyone else to really attend my first day on site. So I went out to the Midwest by myself to meet my first client, to run my first project. So when we were talking about potential earlier, I guess in a larger organization that would cause absolute collapse, right? And I think I was, again, very nervous going into that day. You would give me all the tools we had planned. We had been in conversations prior, but I was on site by myself. There was no safety net that existed. There was none of Paul's experience to step in and save me when I said something dumb. But I got on site. Again, I listened. I spoke to the individuals that were key. I met people across the board. I leveraged my experience from the military to be able to tell stories, to build that rapport, and buy myself some time to become proficient in the topic we were discussing. And I think walking out of the building that day, when it went far better than I expected, and I realized that I could get my feet under me as quicker than I expected, was when I was like, you know what? This is doable. This job is doable. The trust that Paul's put in me is extraordinary. Like, we have something special here. If I can expose guys like myself to this over and over, we can build one hell of a team. And so I think walking out of that company that day in the Midwest was one of the times where I really felt it, because I had confidence in myself as well.
Awesome. Last question we ask everybody: what's your favorite book you've ever read?
Favorite book I ever read is actually this is going to be a very obscure one. It's called Eastern Approaches. It's the memoirs of Fitzroy McLean.
Okay.
He was he was a founding member of the British SAS, but before that he worked in the Foreign Service in Russia, and he snuck around pre-World War II Russia a whole bunch. Then he got himself elected to Parliament when the war broke out, just so he could get out of the Foreign Service. Got elected, left the Foreign Service on a technicality, gave up his seat same day, joined the army, went to North Africa, founded the SAS, then jumped into Yugoslavia Tito. And he did it all with humor, candor, not a positive outlook, a very realist outlook, but everything was sprinkled with some joke to make the bad times easier for the team. Great leader. Honestly, 500-page book, but it's one of my favorite page turners I've ever read. Guy's my absolute hero. And I think it really shows a good example of how to lead through difficult times. So it's one of my favorite books.
When was the SES founded?
The SAS was founded. It was Africa. I believe it was 41 and 42.
It was right before World War II.
It was right when the British and the Americans were fighting through North Africa against Rommel.
The British were always pretty positive. I think when they're getting bombed.
Yeah,
it's like it's raining again.
It's that British dry wit, and this guy epitomizes it to a T. But they did some wild stuff, and it's an incredible book, and it's a great example of like leadership in an unconventional environment.
There's gonna be 100 new downloads of a book that I've never even heard of before. I guess it's gonna have to go on the list. All right, Bo. Really good sitting down with you today. Very excited to have you on the team. You've done just an incredible job since you've been on board, and looking forward to more growth to come.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yep.